You may need to upgrade your PC for this game, but it's got a lot of great stuff going on in it, and the fans are responding awesome.
Huh. Isn't that a convenient answer for every party involved? The gaming industry is an industry, and it's evolved so much from where it has started. On one side of the aisle, you've got companies, publishers, developers that put in like microtransactions. They put in gambling mechanics into your games. You can even charge early access fees for a game that's basically a beta test. And on the other side of this whole thing are the people who make the hardware, the actual computers that run these video games. They don't really function if you don't have a device to run them on. And these devices are getting more and more complicated as the years have gone on. Hardware manufacturers want to make more and more money as well. So how do they continue to make money? And that is something that dawned on me as I was playing through a game recently. I just finished up The Last of Us Part 2. You know, whatever thoughts you want to have about this game, I actually really enjoyed it. And I was just thinking to myself, the graphics on this game, you know, how this game looks, it looks really damn good. Yes, there's like graphical anomalies every now and then. It's like, maybe the lighting doesn't look quite right in that scenario. But at the end of the day, I'm playing through this game. All of the characters' emotions are coming through on the screen. The game looks realistic, feels realistic to play. Got to the point where I was like, the games really need to look better than they do right now. Well, Nvidia and AMD say they do. And on top of that, The Last of Us Part 2 runs extremely well. Like, I finished it out on the RX 9070 XT, which is a high-end graphics card, like, just a note. But I was playing at native 4K, not using any upscaling or any of that bullshit. And I was literally getting over 70, 80, almost like 90 FPS at native 4K. It's crazy. And it's kind of a breath of fresh air. You know, every game that comes out nowadays feels like it runs like absolute shit. Just look at a game like Oblivion Remaster, run with an RTX 3060, for example. You have to use upscaling just to get it to play at 1080p. Games like Alan Wake 2, why can't a moderate graphics card even get 60 FPS at 1080p? Medium settings. Monster Hunter Wilds only is getting 30 FPS, but this is being upscaled 1080p just to get 30 FPS for minimum. And if you have recommended specs, they're asking for 60 FPS. You have to go from 30 FPS and then use frame generation to get to 60 FPS. Like, in what world is there a game that looks like Last of Us Part 2 and then you have a game like Monster Hunter Wilds that runs and looks so poorly? We have other games like Stalker 2, just runs poorly on everything. The newest Doom game requires ray tracing to be enabled in it and is extremely hard to even run on moderate range graphics cards. But why is the whole industry turning this way? Why is every game so difficult to run? There has to be some sort of motivation behind this. But this is where it got me cooking a little bit. You know, a lot of these games, for example, Alan Wake 2, right there, it says Nvidia PhysX in the game. So Nvidia technologies integrated into this game. What about in Cyberpunk 2077? You know, we see hardware manufacturers integrated into the game. Nvidia has a logo right into it. GeForce RTX integrated right into it. And the RTX, for example, is actually a huge part of the marketing for Cyberpunk. When this game came out, one of the big things was that it featured ray tracing in it. And not many cards could really take advantage of that, and that leveraged Nvidia technology. Also, AMD is mentioned on the splash screen as well. Stalker 2 has Nvidia right there in the splash screen of the game. In Plague Tale Requiem, one of the first games to introduce DLSS frame generation when it first came out in 2022, has Nvidia right on the splash screen. Doom: The Dark Ages. This game is flooded with different companies that have all had their little fingers, little grubby mitts within the development of this game. So you can see that all of these games, they're not without like interaction from these hardware manufacturers like Nvidia, like AMD, or even in some case Intel, but Intel isn't as big in the GPU market as of yet. So it would surprise me if these hardware manufacturers don't have some sort of motivation, whether it be using the game for marketing purposes or, you know, just to associate the brand of being able to run better in that title. For example, I'd say in a game like a Black Ops 6, you know, Call of Duty runs extremely well on AMD graphics cards, and they kind of work with AMD to do that, whether it be in the most forced way in their marketing or not.
Being a lifelong gamer myself,
these type of integrations aren't new by any means. But today, it's starting to take a little bit of a different turn. There has to be a larger reason because these are public companies. They're not your friend. They try to do these things because they think it's a good investment for their brand. I think it really starts to beg the question, what motivates the hardware companies? How do they keep selling hardware, like graphics cards, like consoles? When the innovation in silicon, literally the chips that are running our games, the hardware, when that technology is slowing down, how do you keep selling graphics cards? If they already have a consumer base that has bought their graphics cards or bought their consoles, how do they continue to make money into the future? These are some things we need to take into account as we go through this. Because the direction where the market is going has shifted quite a bit. In the past, graphics cards or something like that just used to be how much raw performance does it have? But nowadays it's being pushed into so many things with like convoluted marketing, a lot of different ways to try to detract the value of the performance on the actual hardware. It's like ray tracing. Ray tracing was introduced in 2018, and over time, it's become slightly easier to run on our hardware, while at the same time actually becoming more and more demanding as the ray tracing is more and more intense, but we'll jump into that in a second. Then we have the other side of upscaling and frame generation. These are some of the ways where you can add performance to the graphics cards or the hardware that we have. I will say that consoles aren't immune to these type of things either. The PS5 Pro had huge improvements with ray tracing, which I don't know if many console gamers really notice ray tracing that much. Integrated newer upscaling. And the marketing points for these features can be pretty good, or at least on the surface, that a lot of people get lured into it.
No. You really think that normies don't like frame gen? They don't even know what frame gen is. They just think that the game runs better. Like, really, think about it.
RTX 5070.
Damn, so shit, you just wasted your fucking money.
So there's a lot of people that get very, very tricked into this being a good thing, that this feature is better than raw performance on our graphics cards. And while it is valuable, I'm not gonna sit here and say it's not. I mean, there's definitely use cases for these things. It just isn't the exact same thing as raw performance. This can be a solution when the hardware advances start to slow down, but you can make it up through software. But there's some major disadvantages with this software that also, just so happen to work in the benefit of a company like Nvidia. I'm gonna be singling out Nvidia here because they're mostly widely known and they actually are the worst abuser of this. Okay, we're in Cyberpunk on the RTX 5090. You might hear the fans going crazy because this card gets pretty loud. So apologize for that, but I can't really do that much about it. This thing is a freaking monster. And as you see, we're on high settings at native 1440p right now. We're getting like 200 FPS. It is insane because the freaking $3,000 graphics card, which we'll get into the prices later, but man, I fucking hope that it could run this fast. Cyberpunk is one of those games that is extremely marketed in terms of Nvidia. I just turned on Ray Tracing Overdrive. Ray Tracing Overdrive is essentially path tracing. Path tracing is basically ray tracing every single thing in the game, or at least as much as they possibly can. I'm not a freaking game dev. I don't exactly know what they're missing out on. As you see on the 5090, it can get 60 FPS at native 1440p, which is pretty damn impressive. Then if you were to go into the settings and turn on, some upscaling, for example, we turn it on, Nvidia DLSS quality and use ray reconstruction. Now we can get like over 90 FPS on the 5090, which is honestly a very, very nice gaming experience. And this is like one of the ways that this game is completely advertised to be played by Nvidia. They want you to use Ray Tracing Overdrive. They want you to at least make yourself feel that this is a necessary feature for this game. And yeah, it does look really cool. I mean, look at these freaking reflections in the ground. I don't exactly blame the devs and Nvidia for wanting to push this feature because it is really, really cool. If you can get it running on your graphics card. The 5090 can get it running pretty well. And in a game like Black Myth Wukong, yes, we're at 1440p high settings. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game that is based off the Nvidia branch of Unreal Engine 5. So keep that in mind. As we walk around, you see right in front of the character, there is actually the shadows drawing in the map. Like the shadow draw distance is literally right in front of my feet as the foliage pops in. Like, why can you see the foliage popping in? Literally right in front of you. Like, is it that demanding that we need to hold that back for high settings or something like that? I'm going to run down to the water down here and we'll check out the reflections. And at first glance, you know, the reflections are pretty good in this game, I would say. But you know, you start to move the camera a little bit and you can see that they are screen space reflections. So anything that is not caught in the screen space will be completely blotted out. And that doesn't also mean that the reflections are at a very high resolution, especially as you start upscaling more when you have to. You know, the 5090 doesn't really have to upscale because it's so freaking fast here. You'll start to have a bunch of issues crop up with your screen space reflections. But a lot of these issues could be remedied if you just turned on ray tracing. It would fix things like the lighting, it would fix things like the reflections. So let's do that. So finally, with ray tracing on very high in Black Myth Wukong, we finally get sharp shadows. We don't get shadows drawing in 2 feet in front of us. Thank God. The reflections look like a little bit better, but they don't, you know, disappear when you turn the screen. But as you might have noticed, the frame rate has been absolutely cut extremely hard. You know, ray tracing may seem like this. It may seem like a huge graphical improvement. In ways, it definitely can be. Especially in Black Myth Wukong, ray tracing can be used as a crutch to make the game look better than it is when it maybe should be optimized a little bit more in its base state. And ray tracing is extremely demanding, even though it can actually lead to some visual problems in games.
Sorry, I can't really see. I can't see. It's just it's too dark. Jesus Christ. I gotta turn up the brightness. I can't see anything in this game, bro. Like, I can't see anything.
Because you're lighting things realistically, the world also looks realistic, and in certain scenarios it could be too dark. It might actually be hard to see things. Maybe your character, because they're so realistically lit, they almost blend into the background. You almost need some kind of visual indicators to keep your eye focused on the character you're playing or the people that you're fighting. Video games don't necessarily have to be realistic. You know, at the end of the day, it does matter about the gameplay most of all. Maxed out, this game is absolutely gorgeous, but you have to do so much to get there. That can lead to a lot of issues, especially on lower end graphics cards. I just popped in the RTX 4070 and at the same settings, you know, 1440p native with ray tracing overdrive. Yeah, it's not really the same experience on the 4070. Maybe this is right up your alley, but I would prefer like a little bit more. That's why they make things like upscaling. So let's turn on DLSS quality upscaling and see what now we can get. Maybe it'll completely save it. Well, we went from like 20 FPS to like the mid 30s. You're getting to playable performance. And now what if we upscale from 720p up to 1440p, which arguably could still look okay. Like, I think the new version of DLSS holds up decently well. And now we can get like in the 50s, which is a lot smoother, a lot better experience. But as you see, you know, to get the same graphics settings as like a 5090, you have to upscale extremely aggressively to even get anywhere close to it. And really, if we wanted over 60 FPS, we'd probably have to go to ultra performance upscaling, which is upscaling from like 640p, I think, up to 1440p. And finally, the game is starting to feel smooth. It looks really blurry and rough. But let's turn it off of that upscaling mode. You know, let's turn on something like frame generation, because this is something else that Nvidia markets as something that would save your frame rate. And with frame generation, we're now getting like 100 FPS. Hey, it actually feels okay and is kind of reasonably smooth. I would say this isn't the worst experience in the world, but something that's interesting about this is, you see in the top, I just did a video about this, but we're getting like 50 base FPS and then frame generating 2 times to get like 100. And the lower the base frame rate, the higher the latency, the less the responsiveness. So the lower the base frame rate, the worse that kind of stuff feels. Turn on frame generation, it takes a hit to your performance. On the 4070, it takes a decent chunk of it. Whereas something on like a 5090, the 5090 can stomach a bit of that FPS hit because there's so much base frame rate to work with. But something like the 4070 isn't going to use ray tracing that well, and you have to go something like a 5090 or a much higher tier card in order to utilize these features, because as you go down the product stack, it gets less and less effective. If you have to upscale too much, the game is going to get blurry. You know, if your base frame rate isn't high enough, the game isn't going to be nearly as responsive or even have more visual artifacts than it really should. And this gets worse as you go to the ×4 mode or ×3 mode with multi-frame generation on the newer 50 series cards. So if you want to use these features like ray tracing, upscaling, frame generation, then it's going to be way more effective on the higher tier cards. So Nvidia conveniently stacks every product in the line to make you want to upgrade to the next one to get the fuller experience, to take advantage of these features and the things that you're paying for in the first place. They give you a little bit of a taste on the lower tier cards, but you can't actually use them to their fullest capacity. And Nvidia definitely knows this, that these don't work as well on the lower tier cards because they particularly only really advertise the higher tier cards to the mass market. Take things like the RTX 5050, which just released recently, but they did not send these out to reviews or anything. In fact, there is damn near like no reviews out on the RTX 5050 right now. I haven't been able to get my hands on one either. You know, the RTX 5060, hugely debated. They were not supplying reviewers with these cards to get the information out. They didn't really want the public to understand these cards or see what performance they actually offer. Instead, they want you to represent GeForce 50 series as the higher tier cards, the ones that are capable of things like multi-frame generation, things that are capable of upscaling at a decent resolution, and even take advantage of some features like ray tracing, whereas the lower tier cards completely get left behind. And honestly, I've seen this so much. So many people get upsold to the higher tier cards. I've seen it in person myself. And you know, they conveniently have been increasing the prices of their higher tier products and also malnourishing the lower end products to entice you to want to upgrade, especially with things like the new transformer model with DLSS 4 upscaling runs worse on older graphics cards because it needs more AI performance. So it's another thing that starts to age you out of your older graphics card, if something like frame generation didn't already get you there. There's tons of games that look great that don't need these ray tracing features to be there, but the ones that are advertised to the people buying graphics cards are the ones that take advantage of these things that are extremely demanding to run, and they have these things they need like upscaling to take advantage of them. We also need to mention the hardware itself. How are they getting more money out of the hardware necessarily? Because they want to maximize the profit. You know, Nvidia just recently reached a $4 trillion market cap, and their stock has been going absolutely insane, obviously driven by some other things.
AI has now integrated into everything. And in fact, we need AI everywhere.
But this is how Nvidia makes money. You know, they are a publicly traded company and they want to maximize their profits. Yes, their data center business is their biggest area, but gaming is down here at just 2.6 billion plus 18% year over year. So Nvidia is still making money on gaming, but gaming still needs to maximize its margins. It needs to make as much money for Nvidia as possible. And we see their margins on some of these other things. Their net profit, they have 57% margin on the products that they sell, which is insane. They're sitting super, super cushy. I don't exactly know what standard is for a lot of tech companies, but I think that is pretty damn good. So Nvidia wants to try to get that margin also reflected in the gaming division as well. So how do they do that? You know, we've talked about some things with software to help keep the price of GPUs down. They don't have to increase the GPU a crazy amount, but also the hardware itself. I think it's important to get a reference point of what we used to get. For example, with something like the GTX 1060 was a very, very competent graphics card, so much so that 8 years later, people are still kind of talking about it and showing how it actually still holds up in some cases. 1060 versus a 960, which is a previous generation card at the time, the 1060 is 72% faster than the GTX 960 was. So this was back like 8-9 years ago when these cards came out, or when the 1060 came out. You see that generational gain. The same thing was happening with AMD at the time as well, back when hardware was advancing quite a bit. But nowadays it doesn't look nearly as good. And I'm gonna go ahead and shrink my camera a little bit because I have some of these plotted out for you. This is a video from Hardware Unboxed. At medium settings at 1080p and 1440p, these are 60 class graphics cards, the 5060, 4060, 3060, and 2060. You know, we used to on a 60 class card get like more than 50% increase on gen. But now, you know, we get 17%, 14%, 28%, 16%, 16%, 16%. We hop up to ultra settings. You know, you get at 1440p, 21%, 8%, 22%, 19%, 8%, 21%. And what's crazy is the 5060 is probably the best increase that we're seeing here. It's actually a decent generation, but it still has some problems with like 8 gigabytes of VRAM and such, when older cards like the RTX 3060 already had solved that problem, but you know, they got rid of that. So these increases with every generation have been slowing down quite a bit. And it's important to know, why is that happening? Because it isn't necessarily just Nvidia's fault, though I do think they are getting greedy. They're doubling down on some things. But that fabrication process has been kind of slowing down, and they can't fit as many transistors on the GPU die as they used to. And a company like TSMC is in such large demand that their prices have shot up because they're one of the most advanced manufacturers and fabricators of these in the world. But this doesn't really make an excuse for something like this, where Nvidia, I'm going to hide my camera. This is another video from Hardware Unbox. They say the RTX 5080 was actually an RTX 5070. And this is based off of the CUDA cores that are available and how many cores are available on the GPU. And they're relating them to, you know, the flagship GPU right here. As you see in 50 series, the 80 class card only has 49% the cores of the flagship 5090. And then the 70 class card only has 28% of the cores, which is pretty bad. Usually the 80 class card would have 72% of cores of the flagship, or the 70 class card with 54% of the cores of the flagship. You know, you'd think that these would be a lot closer, but Nvidia is clearly wanting to shift you to get the absolute flagship for the generation. So this leads you to only really conclude that Nvidia is cheaping out on something like a 5070. It should be a lot larger and a lot faster than it actually is, but they're charging more of like a 60 class graphics card for the 5070. They're charging that for $550. And on the 5070, we see things like the bit bus. The 192-bit bus was a typical characteristic of a 60 class graphics card, like a GTX 1060. So Nvidia has been maximizing the profits that they get out of their actual hardware, and not only that, but they're also stacking that with software trickery and stuff, and working with game developers to try to push this onto you to feel like you need these things. All at the same time, they're extracting as much money as possible. This is the process of enshittification for graphics cards and really all hardware out here. Consoles aren't that much different from this situation. For example, something like the PS5 Pro. You know, it is a pretty expensive console, like $700. They're also using things like machine learning upscaling and improving their ray tracing to try to sell people on these things. All at the same time, do our games really need these things to look good or feel good to play? It makes me question that a lot. And don't get me wrong, AI upscaling and frame generation can look and feel very good when they're used properly and not used as a crutch. And I get it. Some of these game systems like ray tracing or Unreal Engine 5 with like Lumen and stuff and Nanite can make the development process quite a bit easier for developers, but it does make the game more demanding in the process if you don't actually go and optimize everything. I'm not a game developer. I don't exactly know how all this shit works, but I think it's interesting to see that there's so many games that can still be made on a moderate budget, like something like Stellar Blade. Expedition 33 didn't have a massive budget either, and they can still run plenty well, as long as the game developer prioritizes it. But all of these things, all these games that are pushing the limits apparently, are using ray tracing or something like that, or relying on something like frame generation, like Monster Hunter Wilds relies on frame gen, or upscaling. All of these things go to benefit companies like Nvidia. There's a reason why Nvidia has such a large market share. This all feeds into their business model. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. I think this is a huge conglomerate of companies working together. There's a reason why the badges are stuck on games that tend to run really poorly, that are used in marketing. You know, Nvidia worked with this game developer. And yes, do the other ways of real-time lighting look as perfect or anything? No, technically not, but is ray tracing really something that's feasible right now for real-time rendering? Let me know if you use ray tracing below. I don't think most people do. Every time I've turned it on a moderate graphics card, it has not been a good experience. I instantly turn it back off because at the end of the day, playing the game and having a decent performance and experience is the most important thing. You are playing a goddamn video game at the end of the day. So let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I do want to let you guys know I'm going to be gone for a week because I'm going on vacation with my family. I'm going to be gone from the 20th to the 26th. I may or may not record a video when I'm out there. I'm not going to have all of my stuff to work on things, but maybe if something comes to mind, I'm going to bring some gear to be able to record. I guess we'll see. I'm going to see you in the next video, which will be a little bit away because I'll still have to make another one, but I got some bangers planned up. I'm going to see you then, and peace.